Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life.
This episode is sponsored by Grip. Got lots of people, places, and things to track? Grip is the easiest way for farmers to track anything important to their operation. With flexible QR code tracking, keeping digital records is a snap with Grip's operator-first mobile app centralizing alerts, reminders, electronic forms, and team conversations. With simple month-to-month pricing and no long-term commitments, Grip can transform and streamline your operation so that you can focus on what's most important, growing. For a limited time, get 15% off any monthly or yearly subscription at grip.ag/pricing with the code THRIVEIN25. That's GRIP.ag/pricing with the code THRIVEIN25. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. Today, my guests are Ben Raskin and Andy Dibben, co-authors of Silvohorticulture, the first detailed guide on designing agroforestry systems for vegetable farms. Based in England, Ben leads agroforestry work at the Soil Association, and Andy is the head grower at Abbey Home Farm. Ben and Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Great to be here.
Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely. So, have you guys been in farming your whole lives, or give us a little bit of background?
You go first, Andy.
No, I spent a little bit of time. My parents had a farm for a short while as a child, but no, I started off in woodland work, sort of managing trees, and then sort of moved through livestock farming into vegetables, and then kind of linked back up with trees with agroforestry. So, yeah, I've done all sorts.
Okay, and which do you prefer?
I like the combination of both.
Okay, all right. I used to, when we were on the farm, we had animals and vegetables. And I mean, obviously the pigs are cute, but the vegetables don't get out.
Yeah, the carrots never run away, Michael.
All right. So then, Ben, what's your background?
Well, I'm not from a farming background at all. My parents were lawyers, and I got into vegetables and horticulture in my mid-20s, working on an organic vineyard in Italy. And so, I was a vegetable grower for around 12 years, and then ended up accidentally working for the Soil Association on a 2-year contract. And 18 years, I'm still there. Mm-hmm. So and I've got more and more interested in trees and agroforestry over the last 10-12 years, so that's my focus now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this. What is the background of silvohorticulture? I mean, kind of like walk us through like development and like how long ago were people implementing these concepts? To
be honest, it's a very ancient technique. I think if you, we mentioned it in the beginning of the book, some of the first vegetable crops tamed as such or domesticated for human production were done so in South America in a sort of almost like a jungle environment. So squashes is a classic example. The people who domesticated and started growing those were living amongst forests and jungles. So I think it's a very ancient technique that's having a rebirth rather than being something new.
Talk a little bit about kind of some of what of those, you mentioned the squashes, but some of kind of like the overarching principles.
Broadly, the idea is that you're making the best use of your free resources, so the sunlight and your water and your soil. And typically with annual crops particularly, we have bare soil and water running off at times of year where you're not maximizing it. So the idea of bringing the trees in is you're having a system that is able to make the best use of those resources, and diverse systems are always more productive and work better. We don't see monocultures in nature. We see different height plants all working together and interacting, and we know that diverse and multi-layered systems are always more productive, as well as all the benefits for things like wildlife and water and things like that.
So what we're saying is, 1 + 1 + 1 = 6 in a silvohorticulture system.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So talk a little bit about, and then are you also implementing or integrating animals in any of this?
We haven't touched on that very much in the book. Obviously, there are farms that are doing that. And certainly, I mean, where we came from, I think, is a lot of agroforestry gets talked about in terms of livestock systems and silver pasture. A little bit gets talked about in silvo arable, and no one had really tackled the horticultural bit. And both Andy and I, when we were designing systems and working on systems, looked for this sort of information and guidance, and it wasn't there. And in a way, that was one of the drivers for us writing the book. Was, if we knew 10 years ago what we know now, we might have done it slightly differently. So I think there are good books on integrating animals with trees, and certainly you can combine those principles with what we've put in our book. But we've tended to concentrate on the vegetable bit.
But there's absolutely no reason, Michael, why you couldn't integrate. There's lots of benefits of integrating livestock and vegetable production, as we'll all know. There's no reason why that can't be a three-way interaction, in rotation, essentially, whether it's grazing your cover crops in between your alleys of trees. There's no reason why that wouldn't work. You just would have to consider how you protect your trees when they're young and they're old.
Absolutely. And we work with an almond farmer out in California, and he just implemented sheep underneath his trees. And he was really excited about all the benefits he's going to start seeing there.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting to follow that. We've planted a few almonds on the farm I work on, and not typical English crop, but we'll see how it goes.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know you could grow them over there, but that's pretty cool. And actually, why don't both of you, starting with Ben, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of your farms that you're on, or the ones that you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main one I work on is not actually a horticultural farm at all. It's mainly a dairy and an arable farm. And it's not my farm. I manage the agroforestry. So it's a 1,500 acre farm. It's rented, most of it, from the Church of England. So in the UK, a lot of land is owned by some big institutions, and the Church of England is one of them. And my boss, Helen Browning, who's also the chief executive of the Soil Association, is the second generation of a 3-generation tenancy, and her daughter and son-in-law are just taking over as the 3rd generation. So it's a really interesting farm. It's in the southwest of England. It's an unusual farm in that it's 5 miles long and 2 fields wide. So it's a big old strip, and we've got a massive range of soil types on there, sort of from peat downlands up on the top right down to the heavy clay, which is where a lot of the agroforestry that we're doing is. So mainly what I'm doing is integrating trees with dairy young stock. But within that, we're also experimenting quite a lot with different systems and particularly range of different tree fruit crops. But I would say Andy's farm, which I'll tell you about, is more a demonstration of what we've covered in the book rather than the one I'm working on. But
okay, very cool.
So yeah, Michael, the farm I'm working on, I've only been there 10 years. But it's a family farm. It's actually, I know Americans love a bit of history. The farm's been in the same family since Henry VIII. So it's a long time.
Wow.
The current owners have, they've been in management of it for 35 years, and they converted it certified organic 35 years ago. So I'm a very recent arrival. 600, well, they do this in acres. It is about 1,400 acres. So it's a big old farm.
Okay.
I'm really lucky in that I'm only responsible for 15 acres of veg, which is I'm quite glad about.
Okay.
The rest of it, but we do everything. It's based around a farm shop and a cafe, and we do all the livestock: beef, lamb, chickens, table birds, and laying hens, as we call them. We have pigs. We have processing, so we have butchers. We do dairy processing, so milk and cheese on site as well. And all the supplies and lots of arable as well, and it's all targeted at a large farm shop and cafe. And then the vegetables, we grow around about 90 different kinds of fruit and veg, 12 months of the year production, and we do that. We've got an intensive market garden. We've got about 2,000 metres squared of protected cropping, so polytunnels and glasshouse. and about 10 acres of what we call field scale, so mechanized broadacre crops essentially. And we have a 5-acre silvohorticultural system, and we put that in place. It's a windy site. So the main reason for integrating trees, or the initial starting point, was as windbreaks. And then lots of other things alongside that. It's organic production, so biodiversity is not just a charitable thing. It's about predatory insects for protecting our crops so we can't use pesticides. And we were buying in a lot of apples, so we've got a lot of apple trees in the agroforestry system. And we were buying in a lot of compost. We still buy in a lot of compost for propagation of young plants and for feeding beds. And we put in a lot of coppice species. So hazel and alder, long term, probably, agroforestry is a long term thing. This is probably the next grower, in 20 years or so, we'll be harvesting that hazel and that alder to create wood chip to make compost for raising plants and feeding crops.
Okay, so the coppice, they'll come in and then cut it, chip it, compost it. Will they add animal manures and stuff to help that, or just straight that coppice wood?
Straight. I mean, we make a little bit at the moment, but nothing like enough to meet our demands. But yeah, we do a few different things. We mix it with all the veg waste. And we make compost like that. But for propagation, just pure wood chip. Takes a bit longer. Takes about 2.5, 3 years, we find.
Wow.
And that makes just straight up. It's lovely stuff.
Okay, so
propagation.
Are you doing that? Is that aerated compost where it's injecting air underneath?
We turn it with a front loader on a tractor. So
Okay.
nice and simple with the kit we have.
Okay, so it's just small scale. Gotcha. Yeah, because you just can't produce enough at this time. All right, so let's dive a little bit into this, the silver culture there that you've got going on. Got the coppice species. What kind of vegetables do you find work well with those?
We being organic, everything's on rotation. So pretty much and it's alley cropping. We have different widths of alleys, but in fact we even have trees inside our glass house. So we've pretty much, and then we've just planted up our market garden as well. So we have trees in all our different systems now, whatever scale, and we talk about the trees as being a toolbox of techniques. So in the different areas, we use them for different reasons. In the glass house, it's about providing dappled shade in the really hot summers. Tomatoes don't like going much over kind of like mid-30s.
Yes.
As we get hotter in this country, a bit of dappled shade in the middle of the summer is great. And then the benefits for the trees is we get late frosts. So we've got peaches, apricots and nectarines inside the glass house, protect that blossom. And then we also got some cherries in there as well, and that keeps the birds off the cherries by having them inside the structure.
Yes.
But really, it's all about designing that system correctly, and right crops, right time of year, right distance from the trees, and that's it's a big subject. But you get the design right, pretty much all of them can work.
Okay, gotcha. So then I'm assuming the fruit that's in those houses as well, just the quality must be much improved as well.
I mean, yeah, it's lovely. It's a complicated thing. You can't pests can be a big problem inside, but we put a lot of effort into natural pest management. We've got a lot of natural habitat inside our structures. Again, pollination early in the year can be a problem. We haven't had any problems yet, but we keep our eyes open. We're kind of ready to hand pollinate if needs be. We've only started cropping the nectarines so far, but we had 80 kilos off 4 trees first harvest.
Yeah.
So yeah, it looks good so far.
Okay, gotcha. And then talk a little bit about the natural habitat. Are you bringing in beneficial insects, or is that something just given the habitat and they are coming?
We've gone. It's very interesting. So especially in protected structures, it's really important. You can't rely on attracting them in from outside because they haven't woken up early in the spring, and the pests wake up early because it's warmer inside. So actually, the first thing we did was put in perennial wildflower strips around all the superstructure of the buildings where we can't grow veg, and then that means we've got all stages of life, 12 months of the year, of the predators inside, and they wake up at the same time as the aphids and things like that. The trees are a really important part of that. We find whether it's inside or outside. I'm pruning apple trees at the moment pretty much every apple tree I'm pruning has ladybugs somewhere in the crevices of the bark and the branches, and that's where they overwinter. So, yeah, they're really, it's all an integrated system, and the trees are a really beneficial part of that.
Fascinating. Okay. So talk about, like, obviously roots, and that's one of the problems we've had because we've done a fair amount of we have like willows and elderberries planted throughout our farm, and actually last year we added goji berries, aronia berries, forsythia, linden trees, and I think some hydrangeas, and then rose hips. Obviously the roots can be an issue, so how are you guys working with those roots and making sure it's not impacting your vegetables?
I guess the first thing to think about is the planning stage, is choosing the right tree. So there's definitely some species, like willow would be one I probably wouldn't plant in a vegetable system because the roots do go a long way. We've also there can be challenges with some of the prunus species which sucker and push out into the rows. So the first thing is looking at your distances and your spacing and choosing the right rootstock that is going to compete as little as possible. But then sometimes you just want that tree, that's the one that you want to grow, and that's the crop that you need. And then you start looking at root pruning and controlling the roots. So that's partly pushing the roots down, and depending on the depth of your soil, you can sort of encourage the roots to grow at a lower level. So you're effectively making a better use of some of those subsoil layers, and then leaving a nice couple of feet at the top for your vegetables to grow in, but also sometimes just making sure that those roots don't grow out too much at all. And certainly if you really want to grow the prunus species, then you need to be really on it with the root pruning.
Okay, and the root pruning is literally just sticking a shovel down around and try to keep it away from around the top.
Yes, if you've only got a few trees, you can do it with a shovel. If you've got rows, then you can go in with a subsoiler, or there are specialist root pruning tools that orchards use. So depending on sort of where you are in the country, if you've got a lot of orchards around you, you might be able to sort of get someone in to come in and do it for you. But certainly, small scale.
Okay.
If you've only got 20 trees, then you can just do it with a spade. So that's what you're doing in the glasshouse, isn't it, Andy? So
that is, yeah. I mean, like Ben said, we've got prunus species in the glasshouse, so we knew we were alive to that possible challenge. Even having said that, it caught us out straight away. The accelerated growth inside a glasshouse was something else, and pretty much first year roots were flying out. We thought it might be year 2, year 3. Year 1, the roots went straight across into the veg beds. So we now do I'd say every year we do what we call a light prune, exactly as you said, with a nice sharp spade stuck down. But then we're planning once a rotation. So we got 5 bays. We have a 5-year rotation in the glasshouse. We actually dig it out nice and deep with a spade and fill that gap with wood chip. And we just make sure we're catching every single root, really looking at that.
Oh, spade. Like you create a divide around
essentially,
the tree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so they get the bigger ones.
And you could potentially, if if you've not got a huge system, you could actually put a physical barrier there potentially, a metal sheet or something, that stopped it growing out. So that would work as well. But
Michael, we recommend that with a no dig. No dig growing is quite big, especially in market gardens. It's something we would recommend in a no dig system. Is a physical barrier would be worthwhile.
Yeah, we have a bamboo, and so we got a bamboo barrier when we got the bamboo and we installed it. So that would probably actually work really, really well for that. Yeah. Okay, so then have you found any crops that tend to work better in this system? I mean, to me, something that might not work as well where it's cooler is like the squashes and stuff, because they're already trying to do the best they can, and then now they're hitting some shade as well. Or has that not been your experience?
I think the important thing is to imagine, often when people think about the trees and the veg, they think about them in very close proximity. The system we had at the farm, it was designed for wind protection. So a rough rule of thumb is that the wind protection is let me get this right, is 10 times the height of the tree downwind. So, we think a lot of our trees at maturity will get to about 5 meters. So that's going to give us 50 meters of wind protection. And actually, the crop you talk about there, squash, is incredibly susceptible to wind. Having really still conditions for squash is massively beneficial.
Yeah.
So in that system, the squash doesn't have to be right next to the tree. Ours can be 20 meters away from the tree. It's still getting a huge benefit from the tree, but it's out in the full sun. So again, it's all about that system design.
And typically you'll be 4 or 5 degrees warmer in the shelter of a tree than you will be in an open field. So you may get a little less sunlight at the beginning and the end of the day, for instance, but that will be more than compensated for by the warmer conditions. And often you see that season extension can be really significant. You might get another 6 or 8 weeks if you sort of look at both ends of the season, and so butternut squash, for instance, is in the UK is a little bit marginal. We don't quite have the length of summer to really make it work, but if you could push the temperature up a little bit and give yourself a couple of weeks at each end, then suddenly that might become a viable crop. So it's really and squash and things like tomatoes and corn, I guess, are things that probably need the most sun, but there's loads of vegetables that actually benefit from being in semi-shade. A lot of the leafy crops actually only need 2-3 hours of sun really a day, and benefit particularly in really hot conditions from having that shade and cooler conditions. So again, planning the crops around we call it sort of phasing in a way, which is that rotation plus the trees, and thinking about some crops like garlic, for instance, or early broad beans, they'll have done most of their growing before the trees come into leaf. So you can plant them really quite close to trees without affecting their yield, whereas other stuff you might want to put more towards the middle of the row.
Gotcha. Yeah, we have that, again, going back to that strip of elderberries and willows, lettuce and strawberries have been planted right up against them, and they just seem to do fine. I was thinking about that the other day because we were going to prune them back, and we're taking out the elderberries because we don't like how they integrate with some other things, so we're pulling those out. But I was thinking, I was standing there, I was like, really, I have not seen any issues with this because of that. So that's good to know. So it's almost like most of these vegetable species, we talk about being full sun, but in all reality, they could handle that shade, as well as there's so many other benefits of the silver culture as well.
Yeah, definitely. Very much so. And again, it's all about like Ben said, it's about the phasing and where you put stuff and when you put it. And then of course there's that massive added bonus of being right underneath the trees. So what we call in the tree row. A lot of the soft fruit varieties that we grow as vegetable growers actually prefer, they come from a woodland environment. So that understory of the tree is where they've evolved to grow, and they massively benefit from that.
All right, what kind of crops would you classify in that?
Well, we've just planted up black currants in a big way underneath trees.
Okay.
Any of the black currants, red currants.
Yes. Yeah.
Honeyberries, we've just started doing. We again in our new system, they're planted underneath trees.
Yeah.
Strawberries are originally a woodland plant. I mean, they obviously benefit from you get a faster crop, quicker ripening, out in full sun, but they're going to need a lot more water out in full sun. And if you start thinking about pollinators associated with trees, you're going to get a lot better pollination if you're near trees.
Gotcha.
And the raspberries for us have done really well under the trees. But again, it is interesting. One of the things that I learned because we got quite a lot of soft fruit interplanted with the trees, and it does depend a little bit on the tree. So for instance, we've got some apricot trees that are, they're quite a spreading habit. They've got really thick, quite big leaves. So actually under the apricot tree, there's almost no sun and stuff doesn't grow very well. Whereas the almonds are a bit more upright and they've got that kind of slightly more feathery, fine leaf, and actually quite a lot of sun gets through. So the stuff grows really well under there. So being, I guess, aware of the shape and the habit as well of the tree, that can make a difference.
Gotcha.
And that's something you can manipulate, Michael, with pruning technique. So for us in the glass house, where light's quite important, that's why we have a glass house.
Yeah.
So we've actually, everything we've done in the glasshouse is fan trained. So
Yes.
on a north-south aspect, we fan trained it. So even stuff quite close to those trees, within like, I don't know, half a meter, is still getting at least half a day's sunshine, if not more. And then how you prune that fan itself will define the shade that's being cast around it. And I think something which applies to roots as well as sunlight is rootstock. So you can define the size of the roots and the size of the canopy with rootstock as well. So that's a really important thing to factor in when choosing your trees. Well, fruit trees, definitely.
Okay, interesting. Before we get back to the episode, we have a couple minutes with Tracy, the founder of Grip. Tracy, before you founded Grip, you noticed most farmers are still using paper records to track all their assets and manage teams. What made you realize how big the problem was?
Yeah, so I started talking with farmers about the way they were managing operations a few years ago and found that most were still using paper to track everything. I mean, some of these were large organizations with dozens of greenhouses, irrigation systems, tractors, other pieces of equipment, not to mention storage, warehousing, and logistics. And I was shocked to see they were still using paper or spreadsheets, for equipment maintenance, records, and team assignments. So once we started taking a deeper look, we found a lot of maintenance and equipment issues getting overlooked, and they had a hard time finding the information when they needed it.
I see where you're coming from. Just the other day, I was trying to hunt down a very important scrap of paper that had disappeared. Now, we have a new paper shredder in the office, and not that I'm blaming anyone, but let's just say the kids might have gotten bored. But, tracking irrigation, maintenance, and records across the farm isn't an easy issue to solve. You have to get an app to track your planting and harvest records, and another app to track equipment maintenance, and another app to track team assignments. Pretty soon, you'll be trying to deal with a huge list of apps, and it wouldn't be worth the effort.
Yeah, that's what we realized too. There isn't anything that lets you track everything together, your assets and records, for all the stuff you own, as well as the team conversations you have in their assignments. So we decided if no one else had done it yet, we'd do it ourselves, and that's why we built Grip.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about Grip. What can you actually do in the app?
Sure, so Grip is the easiest way for farmers to track anything important that their operation relies on and centralize team conversations. You can set up reminders in the app for maintenance schedules, greenhouse checks, and other routine operations. You can also put Grip QR code stickers on all your physical assets, making it easy for anybody to scan to check maintenance records or access other critical information when needed, which is typically when you're right in front of it.
Yeah, it sounds like Grip provides a lot of ways to help you keep tabs on your operation. But what about small farms? Would you say Grip is designed more for the large operation than small farms?
Well, not necessarily. We get a lot of small farmers using Grip for team management. If you have more than, say, 2 to 3 team members, Grip comes in real handy. You can handle all your team conversations, respond to questions, assign tasks, as well as send videos out for training and get notified if anyone finds an issue on the farm. Even for small operations, it's important to keep accurate records for expense tracking and regulatory audits, and Grip can really help with that.
Good to know. Before we get back to the episode, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, so on top of that, we provide GPS location every time you access a Grip QR code sticker, giving you lightweight location tracking for your stuff. Anyone listening can go download our app today. Just go to grip.ag. That's Grip with 2 P's. Give it a try using code THRIVEIN25. That's THRIVEIN25 for 15% off.
Talk about like other farms that you've looked at or seen, or what kind of innovative things are they doing with these systems?
So, well, there aren't that many horticultural agroforestry systems in the UK, and I think we've probably featured most of them in the book. So a lot of it has been the learning actually of what's worked, and particularly I think around the spacing and trialing the spacing, and certainly the 3 systems that I've been doing it the longest, which would be Wakelands, which is sort of pioneering agroforestry farm that's been going for about 30 plus years. And then Martin Bragg, who's I can't remember, 20 plus years, I can't quite remember.
Yeah.
And then Ian Tolhurst, who wrote the foreword. They've all, I would say, I mean, I wouldn't say made mistakes, but they've all done things that in hindsight they would have done differently, and a lot of that is around the spacing of the alleys. So certainly Wakelands and Martin both went wider in their later plantings, and then Tolly, I think, really he planted some trees that were too big for his horticultural system. So he's in the process, I think, of thinning some of those out and replacing them with fruit trees. So, that risk of competition and overshading, definitely is a risk. And one of the things we advise is potentially planting every other row first. So say you have a plan to have, I don't know, 30 feet alleys between.
Yes.
Well, go for 60 feet first, and then you can always interplant another row in between, and sort of take it like that. Because if you plant them too close and you get it wrong, then it's a big job getting rid of them, and it causes you lots of problems. You can always add more. It's harder to get them out. So.
Tolly's been on the podcast, and his system is fascinating, just the amount of wood chips he uses and all of that. So that was a really interesting system to understand how he does that. We actually, around here, were really lucky. They were doing a massive clearing project. So they able for power poles, and it wasn't like a right-of-way that had been treated with anything. It was an old right-of-way that had never been actively used, so they were basically cleaning it from start. So they brought us, got to be 2,000 yards of wood chips.
Fantastic.
Now, it wasn't all the ramial, so it wasn't all the small stuff, so we had to deal with what we got. But, at that amount, you can't complain, and I'll just keep turning them and rotting them down, and literally we'll have the most amount of compost ever.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
Yeah. And then I think for Tolly, he's just using a manure spreader to spread those, right, through the fields?
For the ramial, yeah. And it's really quite, it's not a layer even, it's a sprinkle. So it's,
I think like 10 tons, I think, was max to the acre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually, the system here, Michael, and whether I get to see it in action, we've kind of played with the idea, and the system, some of the system lends itself to running a chipper up the side of the tree rows, and then firing ramial straight out over the cover crops. So basically, not having to handle it too much, literally chip it, fire it straight out sideways onto a cover crop.
So yes, you're not moving it, you're not stacking it, you're not turning it. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. Obviously, the best part would be to have it where make sure obviously it's moving the head, so it's not putting all that in one spot as it goes up the row there.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. Yeah, that would work really, really well.
Yeah. Something if you really want, we've got different alley widths. So if there's something you really want to design a system around, you'd want to know the range of a chipper. And firing chips from either side, because they can fire them a pretty long way. So you'd want to design the system so your spacing took that into effect, basically.
But you could always just run over with some tines or something just to spread them out a bit if they were a bit clumpy. Because the advantage of doing it on the green manure phase is that you're going to go over it anyway and probably cut it or graze it and plough it. So it's sort of, you'll even out some of that. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. Yeah.
The other bit of kit that maybe you could use is on the farm here in the cow sheds in the winter, they got a straw blower.
Yes.
And you could potentially load that up with chips, and they've got a fair old range on them and reach right to the back of the cow sheds. So, there's potential.
Yes. Yeah. Is that a Teagle brand that you guys have for the
Yes. Yeah, it is actually,
Yeah. We use those here to actually spread straw on our vegetable fields.
Nice, yeah.
And we're actually right now looking for another one because that was back in New York when we had it, and I had bought it for so cheap. I remember arguing with the guy, and I think I ended up paying $3,500 for it. And then I ended up selling it for like $7,000. And now they're like 10. Anything used that's decent is like 10. New, they're 25 or 30 in the U.S. So I'm definitely trying to find something, that's that nice use where it's been around, but everything still works on it decently. So, but yeah, those are incredibly awesome machines to have. They just make anything so much more efficient.
Amazing mulching device.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we did mostly back up there. We blew the straw down between beds of plastic because we were so cold. We needed the plastic to heat it. But down here in Ohio, I think we could form the beds, blow it out over it, and then seed right through it, and no plastic involved.
Yeah,
But
we've thought about doing it over garlic crops actually. We grow our garlic over the winter. Quite often there's a lot of bare soil, so it would work really well to be firing straw over the whole lot and let the garlic grow up through it.
it works wonderful for that. Yes, it works absolutely wonderful for that. As long as you can get through there and make sure you move it around so it's not too thick in most sections. But yes, we do that every single year, and we love putting straw on garlic. So Andy, talk a little bit about the varieties that you are going to be using in the coppice. I think you said ash was one of them.
Well, alder,
Okay.
alder and hazel. So we had a bit of a. I used to do coppicing for a living in the woodlands. So I had a bit of prior knowledge. A lot of people automatically think of willow when you think of coppicing. One of the bits of research we did before planting, Ben talked about a place called Wakelands, which was one of the first places to do proper sort of agroforestry trials, and actually they had some quite negative results when they were growing potato crops next to willow. And you've already touched on it, Michael, about long roots.
Yes.
And they found the willow was robbing a lot of water from the potato crops and had a negative effect on their yield. So we kind of I've got a few willows in there, but more for wildlife, but not very many of them. We actually went for hazel and alder. Another reason I chose those two is they have a longer coppice cycle. So you're not coppicing them every kind of 2 or 3. I mean, biomass willow almost every year.
Yes.
Hazel and alder, you're talking 5 to 7 years. The lovely thing about that with vegetables is that's around about the length of my rotations.
Yes.
So basically, the design of our system is that we heart those. Again, like I said, the system here is all about acting as a windbreak.
Yes.
What the plan here is that we coppice the trees. We start all our rotations with a fertility building phase of cover crops, and we're going to coppice the trees and take down that windbreak when we're in the second year of fertility build. An established cover crop doesn't need a windbreak, so that windbreak will disappear when we don't need it, and then it will grow back nice and quickly. And towards the end of our vegetable rotation in the system, we grow sweet corn and squash, which both definitely benefit from a good windbreak. By that time, at the end of the rotation, the alder and the hazel will be back up to full height, and we get full windbreak effect. And again, that's another kind of phasing, which is the phasing of the tree harvest. That longest rotation of coppice, of hazel and alder, just lent itself more to our system than willow, and removed that over-competitive threat of taking water from our crops.
Yes, and that's something that we discovered. We flipped a house and did strawberry tip propagation, which is about a 4-week cycle. At the end of those 4 weeks, the willow roots had traveled 14 feet.
Yeah.
In 4 weeks.
Yeah, I can
we were
believe that.
blown away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, again, they were really tiny, small roots, and we could very easily rototill them right over, and they turned right into the soil. And I'm sure they gave some carbon, but I was blown away by that. Okay, so the hazel is like a hazelnut hazel.
Yeah, well, it's the wild. I'm presuming Ben, you might know better than me. It's the original species plant. It grows in our woodlands in the UK, and that's another thing that's important is to. If you want a guide on what trees are going to do well, look what grows well locally, So we just looked at the hedges and the woodlands around us, and they're full of hazel. So we know that hazel's going to grow well. It does produce nuts, but much smaller than a cob nut, than a cultivar. And we haven't put it in there for nut reasons. It's only in there as a harvestable crop, but all the other benefits that come with trees, but not for an edible crop.
Now, I'm assuming you could probably run pigs in there in the fall, and they would probably eat those nuts right up.
Yeah. I mean, again, in this country, and there's not many left, they're on the rise again, but wild boar, they live in the forests and the woodlands, and they definitely would have eaten a lot of hazelnuts back in the day, if they can get there before the squirrels.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so then when you coppice it, is that you just cut it right to the ground? Do you leave any bit there?
You can choose. If you are wanting to run livestock in that system, you might what we call pollard, which is cutting it over at head height. Different species respond, and then we're back to the pruning subject. You see, So different species respond to different cutting mechanisms. So willows, alders, poplars, they'll all respond really well to pollarding. Traditionally, Ben, am I right in thinking hazel's not so common because it's quite multi-stemmed in its growth pattern? It doesn't respond quite so well to a high cut, but definitely where I grew up, they were traditionally cut at waist height. So
Waist height,
yeah, you can choose that height, but yeah, we're going to cut them down to the ground. So yeah.
Okay, interesting. What other species are common for coppicing?
Well, those would be the main ones. There are things as well like chestnut and oak, and I mean I'm interested in black locust, which isn't common yet in the UK, but so growing your own fence posts. And one of the things that I think is a really missed opportunity in a lot of systems is to grow your own materials. So Andy's already talked about wood chip, but you know there's a lot of things like bean poles and you know fence posts, timber for projects that you could be growing yourself and becoming more self-sustainable as a system. But the other bit as well, I mean we talked about alder, but using nitrogen fixing species to try and boost the fertility again. And although you won't get, where they're growing, you won't get a lot of benefit from that, only that they tend to produce about 25% more leaf than a non-nitrogen species. So you'll get a bit more circulation of leaf drop and organic matter through that. But if you're then using the material from the tree when you're coppicing it and chipping it into the system, then you're boosting that as well. So I think there's I mean basically anything deciduous will coppice or pollard. So you can be pretty inventive and flexible depending on where you are and what your objectives are. You can coppice apple trees and pear trees and treat them on a 5 or 8 year cycle and pick them. So you can use almost anything. The conifers and evergreen stuff doesn't tend to work so well, but anything deciduous pretty much.
I think, Michael, an interesting thing to add there is like everyone tends to think of the products from trees being either edible or wooden. And there's obviously, you've got, we do a lot of cut flowers here at the farm.
Yes.
You know, and we do a lot of floristry on farm. There's huge opportunities, you know, a lot of the beautiful willow catkins you get. We've deliberately put in like pretty willow varieties that we harvest for catkins. There's medicinal crops you can get from trees as well, which there's a marketplace for. You know, definitely some trees are really useful in the herbal tea industry. So yeah, it's when we were writing the book, it kind of opened our eyes to all these different end products that we get from trees, and different trees for different routes to market is what we say.
Yes, like ginkgo biloba. The linden is like a tea, I believe they use. I'm just trying to think what other ones are out there.
Rosehip would be trees.
Yeah,
as well.
we're growing quite a lot of sea buckthorn, which is I love it. I mean, it's a horrible thing to pick the berries, but
yes.
But we're making gin from it, and then there's potentially a market for the leaf of dried tea, and then the bark as a medicine. So it is one of these sort of super plants, and it's nitrogen fixing. But it's not that easy to control, but it's a great plant.
Yeah, we cleared out a hedgerow last year, and we replaced a lot of it with like 8 different types of sea buckthorn. And the goal is to see obviously what does best in our area, but then the other goal is to use it as a massive, all the different characteristics and let it crossbreed. And gene pool is what I'm looking for, and then just kind of starting all the different plant seedlings and just kind of start working on new species and stuff. So we're excited about that. It's got, you know, all sorts of different genetics from Europe and Russia and I think Ukraine. But we're pretty excited about that.
Siberia and China, big breeders, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Siberian and Russian is what I've got. I don't know if I've got any from China, but
it's
I'll have
quite hard to
that.
get hold of stuff from China. I'm working with a guy called David Eagle, who's sort of one of the main sea buckthorn growers over here, and he was trying to import some Chinese stock, and I think it was quite hard to get it.
Interesting. I would love to do a podcast with him on just the sea
Oh,
buckthorn.
you should.
So if
Yeah,
you
he's brilliant. Yeah.
if you can make that
Yeah,
connection, that'd be
absolutely.
awesome. So then propagating sea buckthorn, can that be done by basically like a cutting, or is that all done by seed typically?
Well, they sucker, so you can. We've just been
Okay.
digging up rooted suckers and replanting them. I'm pretty sure you
Okay.
can take cuttings. I haven't done that. I'm just trying to think. I think semi-ripe, possibly semi-ripe cuttings.
Okay.
I mean, they're
Yeah.
pretty vigorous. I think,
Yeah.
it's. I don't think it'd be a problem getting them to propagate. I mean, obviously, if you want
Yeah.
to breed them, then you'd obviously have to do it through the seed. But yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, what would you guys like to tell, if someone's thinking about getting into this, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think what's really important is, and we emphasise it throughout the book, is it's a unique opportunity. When you design an agroforestry system or a silvohorticultural system, every single farm is different. It has a different set of problems and a different set of opportunities presented by integrating trees. And in fact, like Ben said about where he works, every field is unique. And in fact, within one field, you have unique areas within that field. So the one thing I encourage everyone to do is to not just copy what someone else has done. Because if you really understand, again, those opportunities and problems presented by your own field, you can then design your system, pick the trees, set the spacing, design the layout of the vegetables to basically to suit your own personal situation and be your own toolbox of problem solving, essentially, and providing opportunities and new crops. The crops you grow need to be matched to your routes to market, to your staffing, to your knowledge. So yeah, it's a unique opportunity. Knowledge up and make use of that in the most powerful way possible.
And I think being really, really clear about your objectives, because every tree will deliver a whole range of benefits to the farm and to the environment. You could plant anything and get some benefit from it. But to get the most out of it and for it to work really well, you need to be really clear about what you want that tree to do for you. Is it about fruit? Is it about windbreak? Is it about biodiversity? And whichever of those is your most important objective, that's going to have an impact on the tree that you choose, maybe the size of the tree, the variety. Do you want an early flowering or a late flowering version? So all of that stuff. There's so much choice, and it can be quite daunting. I certainly, when I started with Helen and she said, right, we've got 200 acres, let's plant some trees. It's like, okay, what? so sort of starting to hone it down, and you can quite quickly, the way we sometimes approach it is you start with almost groups of trees rather than going, I want to plant some apples. You go, well, actually, what's the most important thing? Is it fruit? In which case, and I don't want them to be too big. So immediately you've narrowed it down to medium-sized fruit trees. Well, that really helps you then without having to think about the others. Or it might be the Coppicing. Well, okay, so then that gives you a hint. And so starting to narrow those choices down, and also thinking really widely about what goes on in and out of your farm. So sort of the inputs and outputs. And typically we might just think of that in terms of, fertilizer and product. But actually there's a whole range of stuff that goes in and out. And that might include labor, it might include community, it might include certainly fertility, but, fence posts, all of those things, vet medicines, anything in a way is an opportunity to try and solve a problem with a tree. But understanding what your farm is doing and what it needs is the most important starting point.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to what Ben said, and we haven't actually touched on it, and I think it's a huge part of agroforestry, in all the disciplines, but definitely in silvohorticulture, and that it's not just about what's happening on your farm now. We're all facing the effects of climate change, and they're pretty extreme, and they're going to get more extreme. So, picture what your farm needs now, but picture what your farm's going to look like as it gets hotter, as it gets windier, as it gets wetter. Now that might be flooding, that might be soil erosion, and that erosion might be caused because you're on a steep slope by water. It could be caused because you're in a very dry area with strong winds, and that's wind erosion. So yeah, it really is a really good way of building resilience into your farming system against climate change. And it's a big thing in this country, and I presume it's the same in the States, is perennial cropping. If you're producing edible crops, perennial cropping in itself builds lots of resilience into your production system.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not as forward thinking here in the U.S. as we should be. I'm hoping that will change. We have major changes in the government. And then and it all comes down to the ministers they bring in, the heads of, and so we're looking at the people they brought into the USDA, which is our agriculture, and we're like, yeah, I don't know. But yeah. I think you're right. The important thing is that we just need to start doing it and let it trickle up.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 years ago, cover crops in the U.S., people didn't talk about them, and now the government is pushing them heavily. So I think it will come. It's just going to take a while. But yeah, I absolutely know what you're talking about, the perennials. And I think the thing is, we are facing, every single year, we see worse and worse flooding everywhere from the Mississippi to, we had major problems in the Carolinas and Virginia and West Virginia this last 18 months. So we have problems, and perennials are the solution. Because we know they hold the soil, we know they slow the water down and all of that. And but I do highly encourage folks to get the book, because there's some fabulous pictures in here. I mean, one of the things right here, I'm looking at a picture about the coppiced hazel row and how you do half the row every single year, so you never completely lose the benefit of the windbreak.
And the systems are, in a way, infinitely flexible. So Andy described how he's going to make the most of having that changing height of windbreak, but equally, you could say, no, I want just a permanent windbreak of a certain height, and I'm just going to coppice every other year, or to achieve that. So you can manipulate those trees to deliver what you want for your system. So.
Yeah, you've got this almond and raspberry interplant, which is really cool. And you could you'd have to be careful, use the almond trees to kind of create a little bit of a trellis there. You have to be careful not to choke them or anything. But
I have had one or two of the almond trees die, and I think I might try and plant some vines up to grow up the old trunks.
Oh, yeah.
To use the structure as a holding for the vines. So.
Yes.
Yeah, it was interesting, Michael. We did an interview with Mimi Castile, who's a viticulturalist in the States.
Okay.
And she was really an eye-opener for us when she pointed out that obviously grapes are a climbing crop, and all climbers evolved with trees. And she brought up the subject that the roots of the grape like to be near the roots of the tree, but then you climb the grape out into the sunshine away from the tree, and you get the sun on your grapes. So that's a really lovely, and there are so many climbing edible crops.
Yeah.
You start to your mind is filled with all these opportunities.
Yeah.
So it's an endlessly creative opportunities and process.
Very cool. Very cool. If you could go back and rebuild both of the systems you're creating, what would you change anything about them?
I learnt so much about how to design an effective windbreak after I'd planted my windbreaks. So I'd go back and replant. I wouldn't replant it. I'm tempted to add in a lot more.
Yeah.
I've got single rows of trees, and what I've learnt now is lots of different heights, lots of different shapes, different widths are really beneficial. So that's something that I definitely readdress.
Although there is that sort of constant tension for commercial farmers, is the complexity is great for nature and the system, but it makes it harder to manage. And so we're sort of always, in a way, treading that line between bringing diversity and complexity into a system, but only as far as you can to still be efficient and harvest and make it work financially. So it is it's an interesting line to tread, and I think sometimes we've got it wrong in the sense that we've probably got too much complexity. I think the other thing Helen and I probably have done is to be, I'm a great one for ignoring advice and trying it anyway. And part of my rationale is that a lot of the advice was written before climate change, and so I think it's really important to push the boundaries and to try new things. But equally, it probably was a bit mad to start growing almonds in heavy clay in a relatively wet part of England. And it's amazing how well they're doing. But I think they'd probably be better in a different field.
Yeah. All right. Well, we really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing today. Anything else you'd like to share before we go?
I don't think so.
No, just get stuck in, start planting trees, enjoy it.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thanks so much. Thanks for the book. It's always a fascinating read to dive into a new whole. Agriculture is so fascinating. There's so many different wormholes you can go down, and this is just one of those. And so it's always exciting to explore a new wormhole and see what's down there. Yeah,
Michael, I just said it's really nice to be interviewing someone who knows about veg and trees quite a lot. So, really enjoyed it.
Yes, I try. It's not as where I'd like to be, but we've planted a fair amount of these, and we've got a new field we opened up last year, and so right now it's pretty flat. There's not much on there, and we know we've built in. We're going to put some spacing and space for the hedgerows and stuff. So we're just really trying to figure out exactly what's going to go in there. We haven't quite figured it out yet, but that was part of the reason. Start looking through the book, figuring out kind of what you guys had, and some hazelnuts would be cool. I think that'd be really cool to do.
Yeah.
The other thing I was just going to mention, I know we're here talking about the Silvohorticulture, but we have talked a bit about wood chip, and it was just worth saying that if people want to find out a little bit more, particularly about sort of the propagation compost and stuff, I have written a wood chip handbook as well.
What's the name of that?
So it's called the Wood Chip Handbook. It's another Chelsea Green publication.
Yes.
So.
And that's on your website, benraskin.uk.
It is.
So yes, perfect. Yes, you've got that there. You show mushrooms, strawberries, animals. Very cool. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you two both so much for coming on. And can't wait for our readers to hear this.
Thanks for having us on, Michael.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Really enjoyed it.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.